Hello everybody, and welcome to this, my third of 3 videos on the Canon EOS Rebel T6, also called the EOS 1300D and the Canon KISS X80. In this video, we're going to go through the menu system. Everything that we access will be through the menu button here. There are 4 different menus in this camera. Red is for your shooting menu. Blue is playback. Yellow, or orange, depending on your screen, is your settings menus. And green is your custom menu. We're going to start here with red with playback. Image quality is your image quality. RAW only, RAW plus large JPEGs, and then different JPEG options. Up at the top, it shows you your image size, 18 megapixels, and then the specific pixel size. 116 photos remain on this SD card. If I switch to RAW plus JPEG, it drops to 91 photos. Small 3, 720 by 480, I can fit 8,500 more photos on this SD card. So if you are running out of SD card space, this will tell you what settings you can use to maximize it. Realistically, what you probably want to do is just pick up about a 34 or 64 gig memory card for this camera and shoot in RAW only, and then edit the RAW photos on your computer. It's going to give you the most ability to get the most out of your images. Beep is disable or enable. Do you want the camera to make beeps when it's trying to communicate with you? And this is solely down to whether you're in a setting where you want to make noise or not. And if you're at a play or a golf tournament, you definitely want to disable this. Release shutter without card. Will the shutter activate without an SD card? Yes or no? Personal preference. If you set this to disable, a quick way to tell if you have an SD card in it without opening up the port is just to try using the shutter button before you leave, and if it doesn't take a picture, then you know you need to grab an SD card. Image review is off, 2, 4, or 8 seconds, or hold. The times and hold are instant review. Off means you take a picture and it doesn't display it afterwards. 2, 4, or 8 seconds are how long it displays it, and hold, it displays it until you tell it not to. Partial illumination correction is enable or disable. This is basically low rent HDR. If you have bright spots or dark spots, the camera will adjust the illumination to minimize those. Red eye reduction, enable or disable. Is the camera's flash going to reduce the red eye on your human subjects or not? Flash control. Flash firing allows you to enable or disable flash firing. Built-in flash function setting. First curtain or second curtain. Now, if you remember when we talked about your flash triggering when the first curtain finishes its travel, that's first curtain. Second curtain means that the flash triggers right before the second curtain starts. So with this, if you have it set to first curtain and you're using the flash sync speed of 1/200th or second curtain, doesn't matter, you're not going to notice a difference. But let's say that you're using a 20-second exposure. First curtain travels, flash fires, 20 seconds go by, second curtain closes, and then they reset. With the second curtain option, first curtain travels, 20 seconds go by, flash fires, second curtain resets, or travels, and then they reset. The difference there is, let's say you've got your buddy riding a motorcycle, right, with some reflectors on it, and you've got some lights up here, or you've got some lights on the motorcycle. You set it to second curtain. Say, all right, go. Take the picture. He rides his motorcycle into frame, and then when the shutter ends, the flash triggers, illuminates your buddy. He's got a whole bunch of lights trailing off of him from the ones that were set up on the motorcycle, and that's your image. Buddy on motorcycle, trailing lights. With first curtain, go. He's in the frame, flash fires. Buddy's illuminated over here. Now all these lights are illuminated. Your buddy's over here illuminated with all of these lights traveling in front of him. That's the big difference in how they function. And creatively, it gives you some ability to change the lighting in your scene and create interesting images like trailing curtains coming off of someone traveling through your scene, or trailing lights. Flash exposure compensation allows you to over or underclock your flash power on the built-in flash. And ETTL metering is evaluative or average. So ETTL is your flash metering. And what evaluative does is the camera looks at the scene and uses the 63-point evaluative meter in the camera to see what's going on in the scene and figure out the best flash setting to avoid bright points and overexposed highlights. Average looks at the whole scene dark and light and gives you the best flash setting to illuminate all of it evenly, which can still cause bright points and dark points. Matter of personal preference largely, which one you set it on. Evaluative tends to be a little bit more reliable. External flash functions, those are the exact same as the built-in, but only if you have an external flash connected. External flash custom functions, we can only see these if we have an external flash connected. Clear external flash custom functions resets the custom function settings for your external flash. Image menu 2. Image menu 2, exposure compensation and auto exposure bracketing. So if we go into this, we can adjust the top dial to create an auto exposure bracket. What those lines that are moving as I do this in the middle of the screen tell us is we'll have 3 exposures that are under, proper, and overexposed, and by how much. Up to 2 stops in each direction. If we hit the AV button, nothing happens. Let's go back to 0 here. And that's what we can do with this function. We adjust the aperture value, the exposure compensation, as we saw in video 2, just by hitting this button outside of the menu. Auto lighting optimization is HDR light, and it's enable or disable to correct for highlights and shadows. We went over the metering modes in video 2. Custom white balance, these are the different, this setting allows you to take a photo and then save the white balance from it as your custom white balance setting for future use. So if you have a home studio and you know that your lighting will always be the same because you're doing product photos over and over and over again, you take a picture of it with a white backdrop, come in here, set that as your custom white balance, and then anytime you set your custom white balance in the future, as long as you don't erase that setting or write over it, you will have that white balance as your setting with custom white balance, so that you can have a consistent white balance across many days, weeks, months, or years in the same setting. White balance shift and bracketing allows you to take multiple images with bracketed white balance settings. These 3 dots will, right now this is 1 photo. This will increase the green and magenta in our bracket, or blue and amber. There we go. And then we can use the control pad to further refine the way that the bracketing is done. Basically, what this is good for is, let's say you're shooting under tungsten light. Tungsten light, we know we need to add blue, but we don't know exactly how much. We can come over here and set it to something like that, or something like that, let's say. And that will allow us to adjust the amount of blue with our white balance settings to ensure that the tungsten light gives us, to ensure that our camera records the correct white tones under that tungsten light. Color space, sRGB or Adobe. sRGB is the default. Unless you are super into the Adobe ecosystem, just leave it at sRGB. Picture style, set this to neutral or faithful, either one, because they have neutral settings across the board. Whatever photo software you're using, whether it's purchased or downloadable for free as shareware, it's more powerful than what's in this camera. So leaving these as neutral gives you the ability to adjust more easily in post. Last two are dust delete data. What this will do is this will obtain dust delete data from your sensor. Fully press the shutter button when ready. And basically it's going to look at, what you need to do is not what I just did. You need to point the camera at a white surface, like a wall or a studio light. Do that process, and then the camera will eliminate sensor dust from images. Let's try that again. So just worked that time. Now it's analyzing the image data. It's obtained the data, and now we have dust delete data from today. ISO auto settings. What we want to have the cap be for automatic ISO. Oops. Oh, and then one last image menu. Live view shooting, enable or disable. Are you going to be able to take photos with your camera when using live view? Autofocus method, flexizone, live mode, or quick. Most accurate but slowest. Focus is on looking for a face, and fastest, least accurate. Grid display is in live view, which no grid or one of these two different grids, matter of personal preference how you want your live view to be displayed. Aspect ratio of your images, 3:2, 4:3, 16:9, or 1:1. How do you want your images to be displayed? Or what aspect ratio do you want your images to be when you're shooting? Metering time, how long is the meter going to be on after you have to press the shutter button? Totally a matter of personal preference and, to a lesser extent, battery preservation with this camera. Playback menu 1. Protect images allows you to select images or all images and protect them from being deleted off of your SD card. Rotate images allows you to manually rotate images on your SD card. Erase images will erase the images off your SD card, either individual ones, all of them in a folder, or all of them on a card. Print order has to do with when you connect this camera to a computer, what the print order of the images is. Realistically, your best bet is to just take the SD card out of the camera, plug that into your computer, and then print from your computer. Because this will just print what's on the camera. If you print from your computer, you can edit them first. Photo book setup allows you to set up the photo book in the camera. These are functions that I've never used and never see myself using, quite honestly. So if you do use photo books from your camera, this is how you would get into it to set up your photo book presentation order. Creative filters are creative filters you can apply to your images in the camera. This is another one of those things that realistically, if you want to use creative filters, just do it in post because you'll get better results if you do it on your computer. Resizing images allows you to change the size of your images. But there are no compatible images available because I'm shooting in RAW only. In Playback, this is your histogram display. whether your histogram will display brightness or red, green, blue data when you go into your playback info menu. Image jump, what this is when you're playing back your images and you use the command dial, does it jump one image, 10, 100, jump by date, jump by folder, display movies only, display stills only, or display by image rating, because you can rate images if you want to in this inside the camera. We'll just leave this at 10, that's pretty useful. Slideshow starts a slideshow of the images on the camera, and rating allows you to go in and rate individual images. Settings menu 1, auto power off. How long do you want the camera to stay on after you stop touching buttons? Matter of personal preference and battery preservation. Auto rotate on, both on the camera and computer, only on the computer or on neither. Matter of personal preference here. Format card erases everything on the SD card. File numbering, continuous, auto, or manual. Continuous means that if you take this SD card out and put in another one, the file numbers will pick up on the new SD card exactly where they left off with this one. Auto, when you put that new SD card in, they will reset. Manual resets them to 1, and then default goes back to whatever you had it set to. I prefer to leave it on continuous because that makes it a lot harder to overwrite files when you copy them to your computer. You'd have to have 10,000 files in a folder before you start overwriting it. But if you go to auto and you only record 50 photos on your first SD card, then put in another one and try to copy files over, it would be very easy to overwrite files. Selecting a folder lets you select a folder on your SD card to write images to. You can also create new folders here. Your screen color, screen color is what display color you want your screen to be. Matter of personal preference with that. LCD brightness is how bright your LCD is going to be. 7 is very good for daylight use. 1 would be very good at, say, a play or in a museum. LCD on-off button. What this does is this controls what turns the LCD on and off. Only the shutter button and the display button, or the LCD will always remain on. Personally, I don't like remains on because this is a bright light right underneath your eye, and that can make it harder to compose your image in your viewfinder. The shutter button and display button allows you to control the display without accidentally taking a picture, but you can also grab the shutter, hit the shutter button, bringing the camera up to your eye, and turn this off before it gets to your eye. So generally speaking, this option, the second option, is going to give you the most flexibility with using the camera. Date and time setup. You can select your date and your time. That's not even close to correct. Date format, your location, whether it's daylight savings time or not, and then save it. These are your available languages. Clean manually. What this does is, here's how you clean the sensor on your camera if you've got dust. You go into OK. The mirror will go up. OK. The mirror has gone up. Now, with the mirror up, you're going to grab your DSLR brush. And what you want to do is actually do this with the sensor pointed down at the ground, and then just kind of brush off the sensor to clean any dust that was on it. When you're done, you turn the camera off. That closes everything up. And then you put your lens back on. You turn the camera off immediately because that will ensure that the shutter is closed as quickly as possible to minimize the chance of more dust getting onto your camera. Feature guide, enable or disable. This is whether or not the camera is going to give you information about each function when you are going through the menus. GPS device settings. If you have a GPS device on your camera, which I obviously don't, you can adjust the settings here. Wi-Fi and NFC are disable or enable. In general, I would suggest leaving this to disable until you are ready to have it communicate with your camera or your phone rather, or your computer, because you don't want somebody else being able to go in here if they have the right equipment and look at what's on your camera roll if you have this running all the time. Plus, Wi-Fi and NFC will drain the battery a little bit. If you turn this to enable, then you can go into the Wi-Fi functions and you can adjust whether you want it to transfer images between cameras, to your phone, to a printer, or to the World Wide Web through a computer. Certification logo display displays the certification info. Custom functions we'll get to in just a minute after we finish all of the menus. Copyright information allows you to enter things like the owner's name so that you can, and also enter the copyright details. So you can enter the name of the person you're taking the photos for or yourself. And you can enter copyright details such as the shoot or the magazine that you're going to be shooting for, something like that. Do not reprint, whatever it is you need to include in there. Clear the settings resets all of the camera settings to the default, whether it's just camera settings or just, this is all camera settings, period. This is just custom functions. And then your firmware version right here is displayed. As of the day I wrote this script, which was the 2nd of August 2020, firmware version 1.1.1 is the current version. So to update this, what you would do is download the firmware. If you need to update your firmware, you download the file, which is a .fir file, and put it on the main folder of your SD card. So you put the SD card in your computer. When it pops up, you just drag that FIR file onto the SD card. Insert the SD card into the camera, turn it on with the shooting mode here set to P. Then you hit the menu button, select firmware, which is how we got into which is right here. And then you'll follow the prompts to update your firmware. The firmware includes a PDF file that goes through all of that tells you how to do it. So it's really pretty simple. In fact, I updated the firmware on this camera already, which is why it's at the current version. Next thing we're going to do is look at My Menu. And My Menu allows you to create a menu of the things you use the most. As you can see, I've already set it up here with the grid display and the metering mode. Let's go into My Menu settings. Register to My Menu allows you to go into all of these different things that you can do here and move them to your My Menu. Now you can see I've added ISO expansion to My Menu. Sort allows me to adjust which order they are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab grid display, I'm going to hit set, I'm going to drag it down to the bottom because I don't want it at the top right now. Now we can go back out and we can see that we've rearranged the order of My Menu. Delete items, I don't really need ISO expansion, so I'm going to delete that. And now it's gone. Go back into settings, delete all items. I've now zeroed out My Menu. All I have is the settings. Display from My Menu, we're going to enable that. And what that means is every time we hit the menu button, it's going to jump to My Menu. So if you set up a My Menu with a set of things that you're going to do very often or settings you need to reach most often, setting this to enable will take you straight to that every time you hit the menu button so that you can just adjust those easily. I actually have nothing in my My Menu, so I'm going to hit that to disable now. And that's My Menu. So the last thing we're going to do with this camera is go through the custom functions settings. There are 11 of these. And you can see in blue, that indicates that it's a setting different from default. And then the white 0 underneath each custom function indicates that we're set to default. So to navigate it, use the cross pad to select left and right to select different custom functions. Hit set and then use up and down to select a specific function. Custom function 1 is exposure value increments, 1/3 or 1/2 stop. And this is just how accurate you want the exposure value settings to be, but also how much time you want to spend scrolling through exposure value settings. Matter totally of personal preference. 1/3 is more accurate, helps the camera have the most accurate exposures. If you're only shooting raw, you don't necessarily have to be at 1/3. You could be at 1/2 if you want to. Custom function 2 is ISO expansion on or off. I'm going to set this to off because I found there's a bit of noise with ISO expansion on this camera in sample images I've seen of it. But if you want to have it set to on to have more range, you can do that. Custom function 3 is flash sync speed in aperture priority mode only. It auto 1/200th through 1/60th or 1/200th fixed. Basically, auto will allow the flash to sync at any speed from 30 seconds up to 1/200th. The second option will limit the flash sync speed to 1/200th to as slow as 1/60th, but automatically within that range. And the second option means that if you use a flash in aperture priority mode, the camera will always shoot at 1/200th. Exposure compensation will be done through flash power. With option 2, it's good for fill flash during daylight shooting. Option 1 gives you a little bit more flexibility for daylight and indoor shooting. And auto gives the camera a ton of flexibility, which means that even with the flash, you could still have 5-second exposures. Matter of personal preference where you want to be with this and how you use a flash. Custom function 4 is your long exposure noise reduction off, auto, or on. Basically, with off, the camera will not do noise reduction on long exposures. With auto, it will if it feels it needs to, and with on, it always will with exposures longer than, I believe, it's 1 second. So, matter of personal preference, but noise reduction with post-processing software on a computer is better than what this camera can do internally. So I tend to leave this to off. Custom function 5, high ISO speed noise reduction. Same exact thing, but with high ISOs. Disable maximum noise reduction at high ISO, minimal noise reduction at high ISO, and a standard level of noise reduction. This is another one of those things, just leave it to disabled. Noise reduction is going to soften your images. And so the algorithms within software are better at reducing that softness than they are in the camera. And that's true of every camera, by the way, not just this one. Highlight tone priority, enable or disable. What this does is this function biases the exposure to prevent highlight blowouts. It works well because shadows can be recovered in RAW easily, and so it's a good setting if you shoot RAW or JPEG. If you shoot RAW, this is very good to have set to enable. You can always dial up the shadows. It's a lot harder to recover highlight detail. So, from a technical standpoint, what this does is expand the meter range to incorporate highlights more into your meter reading, and then you're going to go into post and recover the shadows. If you shoot JPEGs, you can also recover shadows a little bit less than in RAW. So if you're shooting RAW, definitely set that to enable. Custom function 7 is your AF beam firing, enable or disable. or enable with external flash only, and external flash only applies only to Canon speedlights, and IR beam only applies only with Canon flashes that have an IR autofocus assist function. Enable enables that light on the front right there to provide autofocus assist in low light. Custom function 8 is your shutter AF AE lock button function. Okay. With 0, when you have to press the shutter, autofocus and auto exposure are locked. So your focus and your exposure settings are locked, even if the subject moves closer to you or further from you, or into a darker or lighter area. Option 1, the auto exposure is locked with the have to press of the shutter button, but not autofocus. And this is good for focusing and metering separately. The shutter button performs exposure lock, and the asterisk button performs autofocus. With option 2, autofocus is locked but not auto exposure. With option 2, you use the asterisk in AI servo mode to pause autofocus. And this is good if, say, you're tracking a moving object and you know that a lamp post is about to come between you and that moving object. You pause autofocus with the asterisk, get past the lamp post, release it, and autofocus continues. And with option 3, auto exposure and autofocus occur with the have to pressing of the shutter button, but auto exposure never locks. And so exposure is determined at the moment of exposure with automatic modes. That's everything but the M on the dial on the top with option 3. In general, this is going to be your best option. Custom function 9 is your set button function, and your options are normal, which is disabled, image quality, which means when you are in normal shooting mode and you press set, you can switch between RAW or JPEG of different sizes. Flash exposure compensation. If you use flashes a lot, use your set button to bring up exposure compensation with your flash to over or underclock your flash power. This duplicates the function of the display button. And this is a really good one that gives you a depth of field preview with your set button. Custom function 10 is your flash button function. That's this button right here. And does it, let's get out of here real quickly. Does pushing it raise the flash, which is what I have it set to do? Or does pushing that button bring up your ISO selection? Your ISO selection is also accessible through this button right here, so this is a duplicate feature. Custom function 11 is your LCD display when the camera is turned on. And what this means is that when you turn your camera on, does the LCD display turn on, or does it only turn on if it was on when you turned the camera off, and stay off if it was off when the camera was turned off? I prefer to leave this to display on. It's just a confirmation that your battery is good, and you can also look at the display whenever you turn your camera on and know what your settings are. And that's it. We're back to the beginning. We've finished all of the custom functions on the Canon EOS Rebel T6. That is everything that we can do with the Canon EOS Rebel T6. There's a lot to it. So if you've made it through all of these videos, you now know what everything is, how to use it, and how to customize your camera for your specific shooting style. Thank you for watching this video. Please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I'm on the right track producing content which is useful and helpful to you. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comments section below. I'm pretty good about checking these every couple of days and answering questions. If you have any suggestions or ideas for future videos, and if I have the technical know-how and equipment, I'm more than happy to make those. One last thing, Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I gotta get up, Steinbeck. I have to turn off the camera.